you are hearing from these campaigns. How are they resonating with voters? To be determined still.
Do you think that the deciding factor could very well be the American women? Because I think this debate has finally become about pro-life versus pro-choice. All right, we seem to have lost our connection with Brian, but of course he's given you a deep insight into what this election campaigning has been like. As I was saying, we're just hours away from where United States, in fact, goes into polls. And the fact of the matter is that this is going to be one pivotal election, because remember, it will be this election which will decide the future course of the world geopolitics. I'm going to be slipping into a quick break, come right back to race for the White House. Stay tuned to CNN News 18. Welcome back to Race for the White House, where CNN News 18 will bring you our live and rolling coverage, uninterrupted one for 100 hours as far as the US presidential election is concerned. Do tune in for all the latest updates and for insights into how this election is shaping up minute by minute. We'll keep you posted. For now, let's also break down for you how the US election actually takes place, and what is so critical are the 7 battleground states. CNN News 18's Zaka Jacob, in fact, breaks down all the maths for you. Have a quick look.
It is the race for the White House. They're calling it the closest election in a generation. We'll tell you why. We'll break it down on the magic wall for you. Let's start from 8 years ago, the shock victory of Donald Trump, pipping Hillary Clinton to become the president of the US in 2016. He won with 307 electoral college votes, even though in the popular vote, Hillary Clinton got 48% of the popular vote and Donald Trump manages 47%. In fact, Hillary Clinton had 3% more popular vote, 3 million, in fact, 3 million more popular votes than Donald Trump. And yet she went on to lose because she lost some key battleground states. This was 2016, the shock result where Donald Trump came from behind and defeated Hillary Clinton despite losing the popular vote. Then in 2020, bang in the middle of COVID, after the rather tumultuous 4 years of a Trump presidency, Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, beat Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not get a second term because Joe Biden swept both the popular vote. In fact, he had more than 50% of the popular vote, a massive difference, 51.3 and 46.9, almost a 5% gap in the popular vote. And more importantly, that 5% gap translated into 303 electoral college votes for Joe Biden and just 235 for Donald Trump. And part of how he managed to do that was by winning some of these battleground states. I'll get to that in 1 second. So 2024, why is it being predicted to be such a close, such a tight race? This is the starting point for Kamala Harris. She starts with 175 strong seats because these are states like California, Washington State, Illinois, and of course the whole bunch of states in the East Coast, all the way from Maine and New Hampshire up in the north down to Maryland and of course the DC area. If you were to look at some leaning constituencies, some Democrat leaning states, you have New Mexico, Colorado, Oregon, Minnesota. Tim Walz comes from Minnesota. So that takes her to 226. So 226.
Here in Israel, the US presidential election is being closely watched, the outcome being seen as having a direct impact on this country too, which is of course fighting in Gaza and Lebanon and engaged in a spiralling confrontation with Iran. One recent opinion poll here suggests a clear majority of Israelis favour Trump over Harris to become the leader of Israel's most important ally. Trump is remembered for a series of pro-Israel moves when he was president, including moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, recognising Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, and taking a tougher stance on Iran. While the Biden administration, including Vice President Harris, is seen by many here as having sought to restrain Israel's tough military response in a year since the October the 7th attacks.
All right, so Donald Trump and Kamala Harris going toe and toe, and we don't know really where this will be because many are saying that there could just be a last-minute toss-up as far as this entire election is concerned. It is one nail-biter of a U.S. presidential election. We'll keep bringing you all the latest updates. Stay tuned to Race for the White House. We'll be back after a quick break.
Edition of the Race for the White House. I'm Zaka Jacob coming to you live from the lawns outside the U.S. Capitol building. And this is where all the action is going to be after tomorrow, because tomorrow is election day, less than 24 hours to go, and America decides its future for the next 4 years. And the choice could not have been more stark. You have the incumbent Vice President Kamala Harris hoping to make history. If she wins, she will become the first ever woman president of the United States. On the other hand, from the Republican Party, you have former President Donald Trump, who of course believes this country is broken, this country's economy is broken, and he is the man to fix it. Who will America choose between these two very, very contrasting figures? And it's not just their personalities, their politics, their policies couldn't be more stark. It's a choice that more than 150 million plus Americans will make. Mind you, 75 million of whom have already voted early. So what kind of bearing that will have on the final result, we will have to wait and see. But this is not just America's choice. Yes, it's Americans who are voting to decide who's going to be the 47th president of their country, but it has huge consequences for the rest of the world. We will take you through a special 1-hour edition through the course of the next 60 minutes. It's the Race for the White House with me, Zaka Jacob. But first, let's give you the closing arguments from both personalities, from both Vice President Harris and President Trump. What is their closing message to the voters as they're hoping that their faithful, the base, turns out in large numbers in a way that one of them wins a decisive mandate? So far, the polls have been absolutely close, neck and neck. Many are saying this could easily be the closest election in 25 years, the closest election since Bush versus Gore in the year 2000. But first, let's bring you up to speed with what the two principals have been telling their audiences, their voters, their bases as to why this election is so critical and why their respective bases need to turn up. Where both the candidates are in this final 24 hours leading up to Election Day, which is November 5th tomorrow. In fact, Vice President Harris has 5 rallies today, all 5 of them in the Battleground State of Pennsylvania. And she realizes that Pennsylvania, the biggest of the Battleground States with 19 electoral college votes, it's a must-win for both candidates. So all 5 of her closing rallies are in Pennsylvania. In fact, the final rally at past 11 o'clock Eastern tonight is going to have a host of Hollywood celebrities. She's going to be joined by Lady Gaga, Oprah Winfrey. Just in the last few days, you've seen her campaign with Beyonce, with Jennifer Lopez. On the other side, Donald Trump is going to be in 4 different places today. He's going to start the day in North Carolina, then he's going to go to Pennsylvania and close out the day in Michigan. Of course, for Donald Trump too, Pennsylvania is a must-win for either candidate because it is the biggest swing state of all the 7 that are on the ballot, that are going to polls this time around. Let's try and open this up to our panelists who are joining us. This is, as I said, the most crucial election for an entire generation of Americans, and I suspect it's not just about the direction of this country in the next 4 years. It's possibly going to be the direction that this country is headed towards for the next decade or so. Here with me, Lisa Curtis from the Center for New American Security. She's Senior Fellow and Director with the Indo-Pacific Security Program at CNAS. Ambassador Harsh Shringla is former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India. He's joining us live from New Delhi. Professor Salvatore Babonis is a sociologist who's teaching with the University of Sydney. He's joining us via Zoom. Max Abrams will be joining us, American political commentator. David Tafuri is a former foreign policy advisor to President Obama. Michael Owens is the mayor of the city of Mableton. So they are our guests who will be joining us. We'll also have a CNN reporter a little later on in the program. Lisa Curtis, let me start with you. I mean, everybody wants to know, who's going to win? Is it going to be Trump? Is it going to be back to 2016 to 2020? Or is it going to be Kamala Harris? She's making the case that this election is historic. What is your reading of what's going on?
Well, I really think this election is too close to call. It keeps going back and forth, and we see that it's going to come down to the 7 battleground states. Like you said, Pennsylvania, extremely important. And so we really don't know which way it's going to go. But because it is so close, there are a couple concerns. One concern is that one side won't accept the electoral victory of the other side. And of course, there's more concerns about this when it comes to Trump supporters. So if Harris were to win, there's concern that there would be objections by the Trump camp, there would be protests. And I think we can be rest assured that both sides are likely to challenge results at the local level, state level, so we could see certain races going to the courts, and this could take a long time to resolve. So I think the feeling is we may not know who the victor is for weeks, maybe even months to come.
So I remember the 2020 election, which of course was in the middle of COVID. There was a record number of mail-in ballots. I think over 100 million people had voted through mail-in ballots. The result, CNN in fact called the result on Saturday morning. So Tuesday night was the election, it got concluded, and finally on Saturday morning at 11 o'clock is when they called the election. Do you think this time too it'll take that long to call the election?
I think it likely will take at least that long to call the election.
I was hoping to go back to Delhi by then.
Well, yeah, you may want to take up camp here. But, the truth is we really don't know. There could be a decisive win by one of the sides. That seems unlikely, given that, up until 24 hours ahead of time, the battleground states, some of them are too close to call, including Pennsylvania. So I think what's more likely is that we'll have disputes, we'll have questions raised, and that it may even go past next Saturday in terms of not knowing who actually has won.
I do want to tell our viewers, we were at the White House, just outside the South Lawns of the White House yesterday, between the White House and the Washington Monument, and there were these big barricades, big sort of steel fences that had come up. And presumably that is because, the security agencies here don't want to take any chances as to which way this result will go. And if it is tight, as Lisa and all the polls have been suggesting, then one side might not accept. But we'll get to that. We'll pass that bridge when we get there. But let me bring in Ambassador Shringla. Ultimately for us Indians who are watching this broadcast, you might be thinking, it doesn't really matter, there is bipartisan support. I'm coming to you live from the Capitol Hill, and this has been said since at least the late 90s that there's bipartisan support for the India-US bilateral relationship. But given what we're seeing, Ambassador Shringla, around this whole Khalistan business, just last night we had this attack at a Hindu temple in Brampton in Canada. There's also this ongoing sort of situation with the US authorities. There's a case that's going on in a court in Manhattan. Does it really make a difference who becomes the next president, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, even on the other issues concerning the bilateral? Or is it that, it doesn't make a difference who the next president is? The India-US bilateral will always be on an upward trajectory.
Well, the fact is that this is one of the most watched elections back here in India. And just before I joined this session, I was talking to a few people, and they said, look, we are bombarded with news on the US elections. So there is a lot of interest in India. And clearly, we may be agnostic about the results, but we are watching it very closely. So the US elections are important for the world. It's important for India as a close partner and ally and close partner and friend of the United States. On the other hand, there are issues, as you mentioned, which are out there on the table, but those issues have always been there in one form or the other. There's always been issues. And between two countries that have such a close and comprehensive partnership, there are bound to be certain issues that come up. The important thing is to keep your eyes on the ball, to focus on the comprehensive global strategic partnership that the two countries enjoy, and to make sure that you're on track on the larger issues that matter to you. There are issues, of course, as you mentioned, which could divert attention, but actually, we should be very cognizant of the fact that we have to deal with these issues as they come up. But as I said, not lose sight of the larger issues. And coming back to your question now, I think it is important that, irrespective of who wins the elections, we have a close rapport. There is a close relationship at the level of the principals. Prime Minister Modi has had an excellent relationship with President Obama, with President Trump, with President Biden, and I'm sure he will have a great rapport with whoever becomes President of the United States following this election. So I think we will not be diverted by these issues, and I don't think the choice of president will determine how these issues will run. I think both presidents have, both candidates have a certain very positive corner as far as India is concerned, and we will certainly be happy to have either of them in the seat.
I want to go across to Mr. David Tafuri and then to Max Abrams and to Professor Babonis. Mr. Tafuri, one thing I noticed, and I must confess, we've been going around DC in taxis, and we do this little dipstick taxi driver survey, which is the most unscientific way of finding out who's going to win tomorrow's election. But a lot of them were saying Trump this time. Generally, what I found was the level of acceptability of Trump was far higher in 2024 than what it was in 2020, or certainly than what it was in 2016. Do you think that's a factor at play? Because, again, this is the word on the street, the common man's sort of interpretation that things are not looking as good as it was when Trump was in power, for whatever reason, economic reasons, price of groceries, whatever it is. Do you think the level of acceptability of Trump has gone up a notch or two?
It's really hard to say. That's not the most scientific way to figure that out. As you mentioned, here in Washington, D.C., we're not in a swing state. I do think that one issue you mentioned, which is inflation, has impacted those in the middle class, and that may have made them frustrated with President Biden, and by virtue of that, that frustration could carry over to Harris, and so they're more accepting of a potential change, even to someone like President Trump, who has lots of other reasons why you might have disdain for him as a president. I think that is certainly a factor, but there are lots of things to suggest that there's more momentum on the side of Harris, especially over the last few weeks. There's been a lot of talk about this one poll that came out from Iowa, which Iowa is not a swing state. It was supposed to be in Trump's camp. It was supposed to be solidly in Trump's camp, but it shows suddenly that Harris is leading Trump in Iowa. And that may suggest that there's something that the national polls and the swing state polls are not picking up in terms of a feeling toward Harris. I would also say that one other thing that can impact the final result is the fact that Harris has more funding. She raised more money. She's spending more on staff in the swing states. She's also spending more on TV commercials. So for those undecided voters, she's likely connecting with them more frequently than President Trump is. But as your previous guests mentioned, the polls in the swing states are so close, you really can't predict who is going to win. And even when you take a large sample size, it still turns out to be very clear and close.
I just want to talk about that Iowa poll for a second. In fact, Lisa and I were talking about it before we went on the air. So this is a pollster, Jan Selzer, one of the most respected in Iowa and certainly in the United States. And like Mr. Fall said, Iowa is not a swing state. Trump won it big last time. He won it again in 2016. Barack Obama was the last Democrat to carry Iowa, and that was God knows how long ago. The interesting thing, Lisa, about the Selzer survey in Iowa was, of course, the shock value was the fact that she found that 47% for Harris and 44% for Trump. There would be an upset win if Harris carries Iowa. But the interesting data point, which I picked up, was that women were voting in very, very large numbers for Harris, and particularly white, college-educated, older women were breaking for Harris almost 3:1. If that is true, and like I said, we have no way of finding out until the elections conclude tomorrow. But if that is true, why would that be restricted just to Iowa?
Well, I think it's not surprising that white college-educated women are voting for Harris. And I think we also see a preponderance of uneducated white males voting for Trump. So, what they're saying is this is kind of a gender-based election. And that's the breakdown that we've been seeing for a while now. So I don't think that this is entirely surprising. I think that,
You think that's because of the abortion issue, or is it because, Harris, if she wins, will become the first woman president? The reason I'm curious about that is because if you go back to 2016, Hillary Clinton versus Trump, more white women voted for Trump than they voted for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I think it's slightly different this time. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is the abortion issue. It's also, a woman president, that also plays into it. But I think the abortion issue is a lot sharper now than it was in
because
2020.
Of the overturning.
State level, some pushback on that overturning. You had some of the very extreme policies in Florida, trying to restrict abortion to 6 weeks. So I think that, white educated, college-educated women are feeling a sort of existential threat to their futures and the futures of their daughters. So I think, that is influencing, but this is not new. This has been influencing the polling for several weeks now.
Yeah. I mean, the first time we saw evidence of that was in the 2022 midterms, where this became a huge sort of rallying point for white college-educated suburban women. Brian Abel is a CNN reporter. He's now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Brian, if you can paint the picture for us, it's 24 hours to Election Day. Where are both candidates? What's their sort of final day messaging as they hope that their base turns out? Certainly Trump wants his base to turn out, and I guess if you're in the Harris camp, you want the independents, the non-committed, the undecideds, and I can't understand how anyone can be undecided this close to Election Day. She would want more of those folks to come out as well. What's the messaging in the last 24 hours from both candidates?
Yeah, it is to those rare at this point undecideds that may still be out there, but not just the undecided. Some folks that just have already decided to stay home. They're trying to energize, trying to give people a reason to get out, go to the polls, get out and vote. So that's really what much of this final stages of campaigning is about, and they're doing it in those crucial battleground states. We're talking about the Sun Belt states: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, then also the blue wall states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. That's where these campaigns are really taking a lot of their time and energy and bringing it to those states, including today. Harris campaign, 5 stops today in Pennsylvania alone, all of them in Pennsylvania. And then former President Trump, he's going to be hitting 3 different states today: North Carolina, Raleigh, Reading, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then Grand Rapids, Michigan is where he will be ending his campaign.
Brian, I mean, because there's so much focus on the presidential race between Harris and Trump, we tend to forget that there are a lot of down-the-line ballot races as well. I'm coming to you live from the U.S. Capitol Hill. Do you reckon the sort of balance of power in Congress is also up at stake? I mean, right now, the Democrats control the Senate and the Republicans control the House. Do you see that changing depending on the result of the presidential election?
We could very well see Democrats controlling the House and Republicans controlling the Senate, a complete flip. Right now, all 435 House seats, they are up for election on Tuesday, and right now the GOP only has a 4-seat majority. There are a lot of competitive races to look at on the House side of things, so that could very well flip. Now, also, Republicans in the Senate side, they're positioned well to regain the majority, but we can't count the Democratic side out just yet. That flipping is not assured, but yes, we could very well see a flip of those 2 chambers of who will control the purse strings here in D.C. And then also keep in mind there are 10 states that have reproductive rights measures on their ballot. So reproductive rights, abortion rights, that is also on the ballot this cycle in 10 different states.
All right, Brian Abel, live for us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspectives. We'll be in touch with you as we count down the final 24 hours before polling begins. And like I said, election day in this day and age is a bit of a misnomer because already 75 million Americans have cast their vote early. This could be a crucial difference, whether through mail-in or through early in-person voting. That could be close to somewhere, some people are saying anywhere between a third and half of the total electorate, the total number of people who will finally have voted in the U.S. election. Let me speak to Max Abrams and try and get a sort of Republican perspective into this. I did ask David a moment ago about the general level of acceptability of Trump going up a notch or two compared to what it was 4 years ago or even 8 years ago. And curiously, what a lot of people said was they're worried about the wars, and they're worried about the knock-on inflation because of the wars. And they feel that the White House needs a strong man, and they feel like that Trump is the strong man who can possibly end the two wars. It may not play out that way at all. Trump might actually give an even bigger blank check to Netanyahu, certainly. We know his comments on the Russia-Ukraine war. But how much is Trump's support being driven by people who feel, the country's not in the right direction, it needs a strong man in the White House to deal with the problems both at home and abroad?
Well, first of all, I'm a political scientist. I'm a well-known tenured professor at a major research university. So this isn't just a Republican perspective as a commentator. I will say that Kamala Harris is essentially the incumbent, right? So she's had 4 years to direct the country. And so, although Trump was president, he is campaigning against the status quo. And so, of course, naturally, given that position, what he wants to do is point out all of the problems in American society. And that's actually not that hard to do from the perspective of many Americans. Inflation has been absolutely through the roof. People's paychecks just aren't worth all that much. So there are a lot of people struggling. Of course, under this administration, we've seen illegal immigration in ways that we never saw before.
Okay.
Some of it causally is directly related to some very prominent violent crimes, including just this past week, a shooting of a Jewish guy walking to synagogue in Chicago by an illegal immigrant. The Democratic Party has tried to downplay its causal role in terms of open borders, as well as the marked rise in anti-Semitism under Biden and Kamala.